They were clinically dead. No heartbeat. No detectable signs of consciousness. Doctors had already stopped fighting. And then they came back. Every single one of them described the same thing. Not darkness. Not silence. Something else entirely. A place. A presence. A feeling. And whatever they experienced, science still cannot explain it. The first documented account of a near-death experience dates back to ancient Greece. A soldier named was killed in battle. 3 days later, he returned to life and described a journey through a realm of light and judgment that stunned everyone who heard it. Plato recorded the story, and for centuries, accounts like this were dismissed as religious belief, myth, or imagination. Then in 1975, a doctor named Raymond Moody changed everything. He collected over 100 personal testimonies from people who had been clinically dead and later revived. What he found stopped him completely. These people had never met each other. They came from different countries, different religions, different backgrounds, different ages. Some were atheists who had never believed in anything beyond the physical world. And yet every single description shared the same core elements. A feeling of rising above the body and watching from above. A passage through darkness. A light more intense than anything they had ever seen. An overwhelming sense of peace so complete it had no comparison in waking life. And, most disturbing of all, a moment of knowing things they had absolutely no way of knowing. Moody published his findings in a book called Life After Life. Scientists laughed. Then the cases kept coming, and the laughter slowly stopped. One case became impossible to ignore. In 1991, a woman named Pam Reynolds required surgery for a brain aneurysm so dangerous that standard procedures could not reach it. The surgical team made a decision that sounds unthinkable. They would stop her heart completely, drain every drop of blood from her skull, drop her body temperature to 60 degrees, and switch off her brain entirely using a machine that monitored her neural activity to confirm zero function. By the medical measurements available during the procedure, Pam Reynolds showed no detectable awareness, not close to death, not unconscious, dead. The surgery lasted hours. When it was over and she was revived, she described the surgical instruments with precise accuracy. She described a conversation two nurses had in a separate room. She described the specific bone saw used to open her skull, a tool she had never seen before, and correctly identified the sound it made. All of this while her brain showed a completely flat line. Her case was documented, verified, and reviewed by neurosurgeons and cardiologists who could find no conventional explanation. But Pam Reynolds was not alone. A Dutch cardiologist named Pim van Lommel conducted one of the largest NDE studies ever attempted. Over 13 years, he followed 344 cardiac arrest patients across 10 hospitals. 62 of them reported NDEs. 18% described detailed out-of-body experiences during periods of confirmed cardiac arrest. Van Lommel published his findings in The Lancet, one of the most respected medical journals in the world. The response from the scientific community was not dismissal. It was silence, because nobody had a clean answer, and the cases kept accumulating. Scientists began paying closer attention. Research teams at major universities started monitoring patients during cardiac arrest using equipment more sensitive than anything available to Moody in 1975. What they recorded changed the conversation permanently. instead of going silent at death. Some brains showed a sudden and dramatic surge of organized electrical activity immediately after the heart stopped. Not random noise, not the chaotic discharge of a dying system. Organized, structured, intentional-looking patterns of gamma waves, the same brainwave signature recorded during the highest states of human awareness. The same pattern seen in experienced meditators during peak states. The same pattern associated with vivid memory formation and conscious perception, appearing in brains with no blood flow, no oxygen, no heartbeat. Researchers are still debating why this organized activity appears. One research team at the University of Michigan measured these surges in rats immediately following cardiac arrest and found activity levels higher than anything recorded during normal waking life. Another team studying human patients reported similar findings. The data was real, the measurements were verified, but what they meant, no one could agree on. And that disagreement cracked the scientific world into stop. Because what you're about to hear next is the part most documentaries skip over. Two completely opposite explanations for the same data from researchers with equal credentials, equal evidence, and equal certainty. One of them has to be wrong, and figuring out which one might be the most important question science has ever faced. The skeptical explanation is thorough and scientifically grounded. When oxygen disappears from the brain, neurons begin misfiring in predictable ways. The visual cortex, starved of blood, can generate the sensation of a narrowing tunnel and a bright central light. The brain's limbic system, under extreme stress, floods the body with endorphins and possibly DMT-like compounds that produce feelings of euphoria, detachment, and profound peace. The temporal lobe, when disrupted, is known to generate out-of-body sensations, a fact confirmed in laboratory settings, where stimulating specific brain regions caused fully conscious patients to feel themselves floating above their own bodies. The consistency of NDE accounts across cultures, skeptics argue, does not suggest a shared spiritual experience. It suggests a shared biological response. All human brains are built the same way. Under the same extreme conditions, they produce the same symptoms. As for the verified details reported by survivors, skeptics suggest these memories are assembled after revival, constructed by a brain that fills in gaps using environmental sounds, fragments of overheard conversations, and prior knowledge of medical settings. Compelling, logical, and for many scientists, completely sufficient, but not for everyone. But the questions on the other side are harder to dismiss. If NDEs are simply hallucinations from oxygen deprivation, why do accounts from blind patients contain accurate visual details of their surroundings, things they have never been able to see and had no way of knowing? If the experience is purely biological, why do children as young as 3 years old describe NDEs with the same core elements as adults who have spent decades absorbing cultural ideas about death and the afterlife? If memories are constructed after revival using environmental clues, how did Pam Reynolds accurately describe a surgical instrument she had never seen in a room she had never entered, while her brain showed zero measurable activity? And perhaps the most difficult question of all, why does transformation follow almost every NDE with remarkable consistency? Survivors across the world, from every culture, every religion, every background, return with the same fundamental shift. The fear of death disappears. Materialism loses its grip. Relationships become the only thing that matters. One survivor described it this way: everything I had spent my life chasing suddenly felt completely meaningless, and everything I had ignored suddenly felt like the only thing that ever mattered. Researchers who study post-NDE psychology describe it as the most reliable personality transformation in all of human science. You can spend years in therapy and not achieve what one NDE produces in minutes. Long-term follow-up studies show these changes are not temporary. They persist for decades, sometimes for the rest of a person's life. Something happened to these people, something real, and whatever it was, it left a permanent mark on every single one of them. Science can measure that mark. It just cannot explain what made it. Thousands of people have stood at the exact edge of death and returned with the same message. But what that message actually means, science still cannot decide. Have you or someone you know ever experienced this? Tell that story in the comments below and subscribe. The next question is even harder to answer.